All right, welcome back to World War II. Today we're going to talk about the reasons why America got involved in World War II. We will discuss before that if America was truly neutral prior to our joining World War II, and then we will briefly get started on America in the home front. All right, so previously we went over the long-term and short-term causes of World War II in Europe. We talked about the rise of dictators. We did Stalin and the creation of the Soviet Union. Remember, even though Stalin is a dictator, he is on the Allied side during World War II. We talked about the rise of Mussolini in Italy. He is a member of the Axis powers. We talked about Adolf Hitler in Germany, obviously the leader of the Axis powers. We talked about the rise of militarism in Japan. We mentioned Emperor Hirohito and then his military leader Hideki Tojo, and they are a member of the Axis powers as well. We talked the long-term causes of World War II is the Treaty of Versailles, essentially, and the effect of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany, and also the changing of government types in Europe. So that would be your long-term cause. Your short-term cause would be when Adolf Hitler violates the non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and invades Poland. All right, so this is a map of Europe at the start of World War II. I'll come back and forth to this a lot during the lecture, just because I'm a visual learner and I tend to just believe everybody else is as well. So where we left off yesterday, the war had started in Europe. Hitler was very quickly able to take over much of, and I don't know if y'all can see my pointer, so all right, we're gonna try black even though. So Germany is able to quickly take over basically everything from between them and France, and then France itself. Switzerland is neutral. Italy's here coming up this way. Germany's already taken Poland. The Soviet Union is pushing this way into Germany, and it gets to the point where essentially Germany's taken over everything except for Great Britain. North Africa is prominent on this map as well because Italy is very interested in North Africa, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about the European theater of the war. So sort of where we are at this point, Germany's invaded Poland. Soviet Union said, all right, Hitler, we're done with you. They declare war on Hitler, as well as Great Britain declaring war on Germany as well. The non-aggression pact has been signed, but I'm sorry, that is a lie. The agreement between the Axis powers has been signed, and that is an agreement between Germany, Italy, and Japan, and essentially they agree not to attack each other and work together as long as it is beneficial for your country through what would be the course of World War II. It's left open so that if any one of those countries feels like it's in their best interest to withdraw from that alliance, they're able to. So they're going to stay together as long as it's mutually beneficial. Essentially, it's the plan of Adolf Hitler to withdraw as soon as he doesn't need the other two and then take them over in his quest for world domination. All right. We're not really going to focus on the Spanish Civil War all that much. Spain has and we have covered that in the other one. So here we are, we're back at this map again. All right, let's go. War in Europe, March 12th, 1938, Hitler takes over Austria unopposed. They're extremely happy to have him. If you remember, Hitler himself is actually of Austrian descent. Here's Austria right here. Noticeably smaller than when it was the mass of Austria-Hungary, which would have been this whole nation altogether. Hitler is seen essentially, and what Hitler's working under the guise of this is Hitler is working under the assumption that people want him. And he's essentially saying, like, we got gypped in the Treaty of Versailles. Land was taken from us that shouldn't have been taken. All I'm doing is taking back land that was originally Germany's. And in many of these nations, except obviously for the Jewish population, who even at this early point, no one can conceive that something like the Holocaust will occur because it hasn't really happened in the way, and it hasn't really happened since. Don't get me wrong, we have had massive genocide since the Holocaust. Um, the systematic way in which the Holocaust was set up sort of sets it apart even from the other genocides that we have had between World War II in 2018 and even the genocide still going on. Um, it's just different. It's unique from other genocides before and after it. But anyway, um, so even the Jewish people aren't welcoming him. They understand that the rise of Hitler's means something not good. Um, but they're not conceiving that we're going to end up in death camps, because nobody was conceiving that at this point could understand that. But the other people, if you were not Jewish, the people in the areas that Hitler was coming into saw Hitler as a savior. He's coming to save the day. He is the answer to your economic and social problems. Hitler's going to make the world a better place. And again, please excuse the comparison. I'm not meaning it as comparison. It's simply just history. Hitler's coming to make your country great again. You were great before World War I. World War I decimated your country. Hitler's coming to make it great again. You're going to focus on your nation, and your nation will rise up and be number one. And people love to hear that kind of stuff. Who doesn't want to be number one? And so after he goes into Austria and the videotape, one of the things about the Nazis is they love to videotape everything, and a lot of that evidence is still around. And so in my undergrad classes, I've seen videotape of Hitler going into Austria, and just the parades and the rallies and the flowers, and they're super psyched. So anyway, after that, Hitler sets his eyes on an area known as the Sudetenland. It's an area here in Czechoslovakia, again, that had belonged to Germany during prior to World War I. So at this point, in September of 38, there's the Munich Conference. And the other European nations are like, you know what, Hitler, you're just getting a little too big for your britches. We've got some problems we need to address. And so Hitler's meeting with the French Prime Minister, I say Daladier, I'm sure it's not correct, Daladier, and the British Prime Minister at the time, Neville Chamberlain. And they end up signing what's called the Munich Agreement. Sometimes you see it as the Munich Pact. The basis of the Munich Pact is this concept, appeasement. Essentially, Hitler is able to convince the other European powers that he has no interest whatsoever in taking over anything else. He's like, listen, once I get the Sudetenland, I will have recreated what was Germany and parts of Austria-Hungary prior to World War I. I've gotten what I want. I'm done. I'm not going to take anything else. And they believed it. They were like, well, that's a gentlemanly thing to do. We can understand how you might be unhappy. Sure, you've violated basically every part of the Treaty of Versailles, but we're going to say that you're somebody to be trusted. And so the Munich Agreement, there are pictures coming out of the Munich Agreement, everybody's shaking hands, we got arms around each other. People really didn't, either it was a naivety or being naive to a point that we've just never seen before, or maybe it's our hindsight that lets us see what a grave mistake this was, and now Hitler has really proven that he's not someone to be trusted. All right, so the German offensive begins. The non-aggression pact is signed between Hitler and Stalin August 23rd, 1939. Hitler and Stalin were kind of frenemies. They didn't like each other. I don't know how much they respected one another, because they both kind of want to do the same thing. Stalin would love to expand the boundaries of the Soviet Union and take over the world and bring what he believed his wonderful communist experience everywhere. Stalin was pretty confident he could do it, and I think he saw a little bit of himself in Hitler, and vice versa, because Hitler's essentially trying to do the same thing in Germany as well, except his would be Nazism, or his version of Nazism, and he wants to spread that across the world as he becomes number one. And so as both Hitler and Stalin are attempting to become the greatest power in the world, the idea is, let's just not deal with each other for now, and then at the very bitter end, we can duke it out. And so they both have legitimate claims to Poland. So Poland is created, and it's half out of the Soviet Union and half out of Germany. So the idea that they would sign a non-aggression pact, agree not to fight each other, and an agreement to secretly split Poland between them somewhat makes sense, because again, Poland was created out of part of each of their territories. And then Hitler makes a mistake that really, until his suicide, he'll end up regretting, because Stalin's not someone that you really want to get on his bad side, considering he killed, 8 to 12 million of his own people. And so September 1st, 1939, really just a couple weeks after he signs the non-aggression pact with Stalin, Hitler invades Germany and takes it all for himself. And Stalin is furious. And he pretty much swears that he's going to get Adolf Hitler if that's the last thing he ever does. And once Hitler invades Poland, that is the short-term cause for World War II. And Great Britain and France, for what they're worth, jump in and say, all right, Germany, this is it. We have appeased you. We gave you what you wanted. We've given in to you. We're done. It's not working. You have to be stopped. We can't allow this to happen. And the Soviet Union is going to join in on the side of the Allies. So you end up with your group, the Allies, which at this point, at the beginning of the war, your main allies are France, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. United States will later on, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, join in on the side of the Allies. The Axis powers, as mentioned before in the introduction, are Japan, Italy, and Germany, with Germany sort of being the leader of the Axis powers. So Germany practices something called blitzkrieg or lightning war. Their idea is sort of shock and awe. We've amassed such a massive military power. We're just going to bomb the ever living heck out of people, do it so hard, so fast that people will surrender because they sort of don't know what's come for them. And after the declaration of war, there's something referred to as phony war, and we've seen this with every single war we've talked about. There's this declaration of war, yeah, we're going to fight, and then there's this period, usually of months, where all the countries involved really sort of plan their strategies, and there's not a lot of fighting going on. We know that it's coming, but we're all getting ready. So after the attack of Poland, both sides gear their troops up, and then April 9th, 1940, Hitler invades Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Luxembourg. So as mentioned before, he basically, here's Norway, here's Denmark, here's Netherlands is going to take over, here's Belgium, here's Luxembourg. He's basically taking everything essentially unopposed, and even if there is opposition, there's nothing that they can do to really stop him. And so he's headed toward France. Already mentioned the Allies and the Axis powers. He's working to take over France. He's able to control the north of France. And so really at this point, there is a small group of France that remains free. And the leader of the Free French Forces is Charles de Gaulle. Oh, goodness, y'all, I'm sure you missed my writing. Charles de Gaulle, he is the leader of the Free French Forces. But basically all of France gets taken by the Soviet Union. So at this point, really the only people between the United States and Germany is Great Britain. So if Great Britain falls, if the UK falls, then Germany's coming this way, going into attacking the United States. Now, part of the German army is over here trying to invade the Soviet Union. So Stalin's kind of dealing with the Axis powers, because remember, Stalin has Japan on this side, because that's how far the Soviet Union goes. He's got Italy coming over here, so he's very busy. It's not as if during this time period, Stalin's not doing anything, or there's not any fighting going on between Germany and the Soviet Union. There totally is. They're just occupied fighting each other. And so the United States understands that we've got to do something. The summer of 1940 is referred to as the bombing of Britain. Essentially that summer, in massive amounts, Germany starts bombing Britain basically nonstop. There is this effort in the major cities in Britain to remove the children. If you've ever read the book or seen the movie The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the reason that the kids are out in the country at the house where then they have all the experience that leads them to Narnia is because they were evacuees from the city of London during that summer, the summer of the bombing. And there was this massive goal to move women and children out to the countryside. And so the United States, Britain holds strong, and eventually after that summer, Hitler's like, well, I need to come up with another plan because I'm not able, my blitzkrieg isn't working on Britain. I'm going to have to do something else. And the United States then resolves in the summer of 1940, again, we're telling everyone that will listen to us, we're neutral, we're neutral, we're neutral, it's your idea, we're isolationist, we got hurt during World War I, we're not interested, we can't tell people how neutral we are, but we're also not stupid. And we realize that we've got to do something. We can't just let Great Britain fall. It's not in our best interest. So in September of 39, this is right after Germany invades Poland, United States starts something called the cash and carry policy. Essentially, if you got the cash and you will bring your ships over to the United States, we'll sell weapons. Now, because we are officially neutral, we'll say that we'll sell weapons to anyone, although we're not selling weapons to Germany. In fact, we're not really selling that many weapons to the Soviet Union. Because remember, the Soviet Union is everything that America hates and fears. They're communist. They're under a strong dictator. That's the as opposite from America as you can get. We've had the Red Scare after World War I. But we're going to align ourselves with Stalin because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Stalin kind of joins with the United States. And Franklin Roosevelt and Stalin had this weird relationship that they kind of got along in an odd sort of way. And it's kind of good for Stalin because he's doing some really creepy stuff. And as long as he's our friend, we're not getting investigated. We've already mentioned the Tripartite Act. All right, so if the U.S. attacks any of the nations in the Axis powers, we're going to face a two-front war. So if we had attacked Germany, Italy, or Japan, we would have had Germany coming at us on the Atlantic Ocean and Japan coming at us on the Pacific Ocean, and we didn't want to deal with that. We weren't ready for that. We're still in the middle of the Great Depression. We can't even take care of ourselves. We can't help other countries. And so it's in our economic best interest as people begin to go to work building these weapons that we plan to sell to the European powers. So that's helping us, but we're kind of have to deal with ourselves right now. So interestingly, though, just in case, the U.S. passes the Selective Service Act in 1940. It's the first peacetime draft in history. If you were between the ages of 21 and 35, you could be drafted to serve in the military. Obviously, later on, that goes down to 18. And I have to pause because my phone is ringing. And, oh, wait, no. All right. Okay, during that pause, I noticed that that this lecture is already really long. So how exciting about that, huh? Okay. All right, so I had to delete all my stuff. Let's kind of refocus. All right, here we go. So we said they passed the first Selective Service Act. You want to be able to note all the things that the United States does that indicates that we're not really neutral. So you've got cash and carry. You've got the fact that we're passing the Selective Service Act. In 1940, Franklin Roosevelt runs for and wins a third term in office. He's the first president to do so. Why? Not why did he run, but why did he win? Now what's interesting is Franklin Roosevelt is winning by less and less degrees of margins than he was after the first election in 32. So he obviously wins again in 36, but it's a lower margin than what he won in 32. And the same thing with 40, and the same thing when he wins his fourth term in office. But essentially, it looks like we're going into war. Economically, things are starting to get better. We're going to stick with who we're comfortable with and who seems to be able to hold the helm, and that's Roosevelt. So the Lend-Lease policy, this is cash and carry wasn't working. Why? Because the Allied nations didn't have any money, and they weren't able to, I'm going to pause this. Sorry, I'm pausing again. I think I'm having technical difficulties. All right, we're going to try this last time, and hopefully this is working, because otherwise I'll be very unhappy. Okay, so we have the cash and carry policy, which is where the United States was selling the weapons, but that wasn't working because the Allied nations couldn't afford to buy them for us, but they still needed to have the weapons. And so we started the Lend-Lease plan, which essentially says that if you want the weapons, you can use them during the war and then buy them back at a discounted price, which basically was just our way of giving weapons to other people. But the government also paid for it, so it was a way to put people back to work, and we consider ourselves the arsenal for democracy. We do give some weapons to the Soviet Union, but not in a timely fashion, and that's going to become an issue later on. So sort of put that in the back of your head. When we start talking about the rise of the Cold War, it will come up again. So in the 1940s, the German U-boats are back at it again, causing all sorts of havoc. Same thing that happened during World War I. They're attacking our ships. We don't like it. We decide that we have the right to attack them back because we're just not going to be bullied. So again, example of how we're not neutral. Example of how we're not neutral. Keep these up. Here's another example of how we're not neutral. The Atlantic Charter is part of the Atlantic Conference. And it's a meeting between Winston Churchill, who at this point is now the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He has replaced Neville Chamberlain, and Franklin Roosevelt. And they are actually on a boat in the middle of the Atlantic, which is why it's called the Atlantic Charter, and they're at the Atlantic Conference. And they're talking about what are we going to do when World War II is over. So we're already planning for the post-war world terms of surrender for a war that we aren't even officially in, which doesn't make us seem very neutral at all. And essentially, we both work. They're blah, blah, blah. Essentially, FDR and Churchill come up with this idea that we need to work for disarmament, so limit the amount of guns. Countries need to have amount of self-determination. That's really looking at countries that are colonized, allowing them the right to rule themselves. Economic cooperation amongst the nations, lower your tariffs, and freedom of the seas. Essentially, everything that was really in Woodrow Wilson's 14 points that he brought to the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I, that all the European countries were like, this is stupid, we want nothing to do with it, and they threw it out. It also calls for a United Nations. So at this point, the League of Nations is completely defunct, right? It really didn't do anything. We made sure it was a failure. The countries that were causing bad things dropped out of the League of Nations. So that's kind of where we're at. But Churchill and Woodrow and FDR want to start the United Nations, essentially the same thing as the League of Nations, but this time we're actually going to join and make sure it's successful. And so there's an official thing of the Allies. It's 26 nations fighting the Axis powers. Again, depending on the power status of your nation, your contribution is very varied. All right. So Japan and Tojo. In 1937, Japan is under the military leadership of Hideki Tojo, and they invade Manchuria, China. Japan essentially is like the Germany of the Pacific. They claim that they also need to get more living space. I mean, they are an island, so if they want to grow, they are going to have to look elsewhere. They really want to take over all of the Pacific, and eventually their long-term goal is to take Hawaii and then take the western side of the United States. Of course, they haven't publicized that, and very slowly they're starting to take over smaller island nations within the Pacific, which isn't really that difficult because you're talking about teeny tiny islands. And so by 1941, the only islands that have not been taken over by Japan are those owned by the United States. And the United States is like, Japan, you need to stop. You're being very naughty. And so, again, we don't want to attack them because we don't want to get involved in the war. So we cut off trade with them. We put them on a trade embargo, which seriously affects the amount of oil that Japan has access to. Because prior to and during World War II, the United States, which is the largest exporter of oil, after World War II, will become the largest importer of oil. And so you don't mess with people in their oil. You do not mess with their access to get their ability to get resources. So Japan is super, super, super mad. And Tojo, Prime Minister, the Emperor's Hirohito, military people, okay, he's like, listen, we don't want to fight you, United States. I'm sure we can work something out, wink, wink. So November 5th, 1941, the Japanese military begins secretly getting ready to attack the United States, and they plan on attacking all of the American-owned islands in the Pacific, and then Hawaii, and then from Hawaii launching an attack on the west coast of the United States. But in order to keep the United States sort of in the dark and thinking that they're all want to be buddies with us, they send an ambassador and a diplomatic mission here over to the United States to meet with FDR. So FDR is meeting with the Japanese, who are talking about how we are sure we can work everything out, while at the same time, Japan is planning this massive attack on the United States that we're sort of aware of, but not able to really aware of. We understand that they're planning to do something naughty. We just don't know when and where. It's all mysterious, but not mysterious at the same time. So December 7th, 1941, it's a Sunday. It's a really pretty Sunday. People are resting. And then out of the clear blue sky, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. And oddly enough, At the same time that's going on, so remember there's time differences. The Japanese ambassador group has told the United States, or they had received communication from their office, that they need to close up shop, that we can't reach an agreement and leave. And then Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. And the United States, like, what the French toast has gone on? Wow, that kind of came out of left field. Here you are trying to talk peace with us, but you're really over here attacking us. And it did catch us off guard. People were sleeping. People were going about their Sunday business. We really were like, oh my God, we're being attacked. And the news footage after that is just shocking, with the ships and exploding. And that becomes our main source of domestic terrorism, of course, until 9/11. And after we are attacked, the United States declares war on Japan. December 7th, 1941 is referred to as the date which will live in infamy. That is a quote from Franklin Roosevelt when he gives his declaration of war speech. And essentially he says that because of the distance between Japan and Hawaii, we know this wasn't a spur of the moment attack. They've planned this. They've been planning this the whole time. That same day, they attack our holdings on the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island. So it's not just Pearl Harbor that gets attacked, it's all the U.S. holdings within the Pacific. And now that we have an act of aggression, the United States enters the war, and we're like, all right, we're coming in. But our person that we're really mad at isn't Hitler. He sure is a jerk face. We are furious at Japan because they have physically attacked us, and they are threatening to take over the west coast of the United States. America is freaking out. We think that there are spies everywhere, that all the Japanese people living in the West Coast must have known about this. They must have done some sort of Japanese ring click, and they're all against us. That's going to lead to the internment camps and this just mass panic. We just are running around for a little bit like chickens with our heads cut off, particularly American citizens, because we just didn't expect this. We expected something from Germany because they're bad, but we didn't really expect it from Japan. So we kind of get our wits together, and we're ready for war. And that, of course, is what's going to end the Great Depression. 5 million people volunteer from war, but that's not enough. Another 10 million come from the draft that we started before we officially went into war. The need is so great that women are serving in the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps. They can serve as volunteers in non-combat positions, but we were actually putting women in greater roles within the military than we did in World War I. This isn't cutesy volunteering. This is, we need you, ladies. We need as many people as we can. We will give you rank and recognition for your service. A lot of people disagree with it, but because we need women so much, the Army is willing to change its previous status. Women are serving as nurses, ambulance drivers, radio operators, electricians, pilots. They're doing more than they ever have before, and that'll be important because when the war's over, women say, I don't know that I necessarily want to go back home and make your coffee and fix you a sandwich, husband. I may want to do something else. Keep that. All right, minority groups sort of wonder and try to rationalize fighting for a country that keeps them as second-class citizens, right? Like Japan's not making them second-class citizens, America is. But still, minorities volunteer in droves. 300,000 Mexican Americans, 1 million African Americans, Asian Americans, although we'll talk about how well that goes over for a while, and Native Americans all volunteer for the war effort. And they all do extraordinary things. For African Americans, it's all about what's called the double V. For African Americans, even though they're serving in segregated units with white commanders and they're still really pushed to non-combat roles, it is seen if we can help the United States get victory in Europe, we can come home and get victory with civil rights. It is World War II. That will be the push that will start the civil rights movement within the United States, and you want to make sure you understand that. Native Americans, the Navajo code talkers, the only military code never to be broken. They're using their own language, and the Axis powers can't figure it out. Getting the economy ready. Same thing like we had with World War I. You've got to massively switch your economy. We've got to go and focus on what can be used for benefit in the war effort. So no more rubber duck factory. Now I'm making tires, or now I'm using my machines to make other things. Because the men have gone for war, the women step up. They step up in droves, and they go and work in the factories. And the women are the ones making the weapons and the machinery and the bandages and the uniforms. And women are earning 60% of what companies paid men. So companies are happy to hire women because it's cheaper labor and they're making record profits. Women don't care because I'm helping my husband out and now I'm getting a paycheck. Rosie the Riveter is the big propaganda that you see come out of this, telling women, come on, let's tie up our hair. We can do it. We can go and serve a role in World War II. We can help our men out. We are just as important. We got it, girls. The federal government steps in. Again, the federal government never takes over everything because they can't, doesn't happen. But they do need to do some things to sort of make sure the economy that's been recovering from the Great Depression doesn't go wonky during war. So we do have price freezing, which is to fight inflation. So we freeze prices during the war. The government raises the income tax and sells war bonds. This is how we pay for the war. So just like every other war, we pay for the war in income taxes and war bonds. It's very popular to buy war bonds. If you're not buying a war bond, you might look as if you might as well be in bed with Germans. The War Production Board. In World War I, we called it the War Industries Board. In World War II, it's the War Production Board. Their job is to make sure that industries are being encouraged to make items for the war. And it also leads to rubber jobs, scrap iron jobs. They want to make sure that we're allocating all necessary materials to the war effort and not to frivolous things that aren't helping us beat Japan, Germany, and then to a lesser degree, Italy. Victory gardens, you saw them in World War I, you see them in World War II. Americans are encouraged to grow their own food sources. Schools are encouraged to grow their own food sources. Again, everything that we're not using is going to be sent overseas. Again, we are the breadbasket for the Allied troops. Rationing. So in World War I, we had the Wheatless Wednesdays, Meatless Tuesdays, etc., Meatless Mondays. In World War II, you're actually ordered ration booklets, and they're little stamps, and that is how much you were given for your family. And so when you went in to purchase bread and sugar and milk, you had to use a ration stamp, and when you were out, you were out. There's a huge black market for ration booklets that comes up over time, but people really saw it as being patriotic and doing their duty and really stepping up. This is, after all, known as the greatest generation. So that was my excited talk and very sort of weird recording of the start of World War II. We will talk more about it tomorrow. This is a long ed puzzle, but I'm pretty sure you'll be okay. Over and out.